Listen carefully to this tale of terror, for it reveals the cursed secret of Peppa Pig's school that no one was ever meant to discover. This is the story of the endless day that trapped everyone in a nightmare from which there is no escape. It began on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning at Peppa's school. The children arrived as usual, carrying their backpacks and lunch boxes, completely unaware that this day would repeat forever. The clock on the classroom wall showed exactly 9 o'clock when the curse began. Peppa noticed something strange first. The same butterfly kept flying past the window in exactly the same pattern, over and over again. Miss Rabbit was writing the same lesson on the blackboard, using the exact same words, making the exact same movements. At first, Peppa thought she was imagining things. But when Pedro Pony asked the exact same question at the exact same time, using the exact same words, she knew something was terribly wrong. The day was repeating itself, and no one else seemed to notice. During lunch break, Peppa tried to tell her friends about the strange repetition. But every time she spoke, they would respond with the exact same words they had used before. Their eyes became glassy and vacant, as if they were sleepwalking through their own lives. The playground equipment began to move on its own. The swings would swing back and forth with no one on them, always in the same rhythm. The slide would make creaking sounds at precisely the same moments. Even the clouds in the sky followed the exact same pattern. As the day progressed, Peppa realized she was the only one who retained her memories from each loop. Everyone else was trapped in their scripted actions, saying the same things, doing the same activities, completely unaware of their imprisonment. The school building itself began to change with each repetition. The hallways grew longer and darker. New doors appeared that led to rooms that shouldn't exist. The windows showed different views each time, sometimes revealing landscapes that were impossible and terrifying. In the art room, the children painted the same pictures over and over again. But with each loop, the paintings became more disturbing. Happy family portraits transformed into twisted nightmares. Bright flowers wilted into dead, thorny vines on the paper. The library books rewrote themselves during each cycle. Stories that once had happy endings now concluded with horror and despair. The characters in the books seemed to be aware of their repetitive fate, pleading from the pages to be set free from their endless stories. During music class, the same song played repeatedly, but the melody became more distorted with each loop. The instruments played themselves, creating haunting harmonies that echoed through the empty corridors long after the music lesson had ended. The cafeteria served the same meal every day, but the food began to rot and decay while still being served. The lunch ladies continued their routine, smiling as they handed out spoiled sandwiches and sour milk, completely oblivious to the horror they were distributing. Peppa discovered that the school's basement held the source of the curse. Ancient symbols were carved into the walls, glowing with an eerie green light. In the center of the room stood an old grandfather clock that had stopped at 9 o'clock, the exact moment the loops began. She tried to break the clock, but her hands passed right through it as if it were made of mist. The clock existed in a different dimension, controlling time itself from beyond the physical world.
The forgotten music box. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Peppa discovered something extraordinary in the attic. While searching for old toys, she found a dusty music box hidden behind some forgotten books. The music box was ornate and mysterious, with strange symbols carved into its wooden surface. When Peppa wound it up, a haunting melody began to play, unlike anything she had ever heard before. As the melody filled the attic, something strange began to happen. The air grew cold, and shadows started dancing on the walls. Peppa felt a chill run down her spine as she noticed her reflection in the music box's mirror was changing. Her pink skin was slowly turning green, and dark stitches were appearing across her face. Frightened, Peppa ran downstairs to find her family, but what she discovered was even more terrifying. George was sitting motionless in the living room. his eyes vacant and his skin the same sickly green color. When he turned to look at her, Peppa saw that he too had the mysterious stitches covering his body. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig were in the kitchen, but they weren't themselves anymore. They moved like puppets, their movements jerky and unnatural. When they spoke, their voices were hollow and distant, as if coming from far away. They told Peppa that the music box had awakened something ancient and powerful.
The House of Horrors. It was supposed to be a normal sleepover at Peppa's house. The yellow walls that once felt warm and welcoming now seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. As the sun set behind the hills, something sinister began to awaken within the very foundations of the Pig family home. Peppa stood in the living room, but her usual pink dress had turned a sickly shade of gray. Her eyes, once bright and cheerful, now glowed with an otherworldly red light. "Welcome to my house," she whispered, her voice echoing strangely through the rooms. "But you may never leave." The front door slammed shut behind Susie Sheep, who had come for what she thought would be a fun evening. The sound reverberated through the house like thunder, and suddenly all the windows went black, as if the outside world had simply ceased to exist. George appeared at the top of the stairs, but he was no longer the innocent little brother everyone knew. His dinosaur toy had transformed into something grotesque and alive, its plastic eyes now real and filled with malice. "Dinosaur," he said, but the word came out as a bone-chilling roar. The kitchen, where Mummy Pig once cooked delicious meals, had become a chamber of nightmares. The stove burned with green flames that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Pots and pans moved by themselves, clanging together in a rhythm that sounded like a funeral march. Daddy Pig sat in his chair, but his newspaper was blank, except for one headline that appeared and disappeared. "No one escapes the house." His glasses reflected not the room around him, but scenes of terror from other dimensions, other realities where the Pig family had already claimed their victims. The stairs creaked and groaned as if they were alive, each step producing a sound like breaking bones. The family portraits on the walls began to change, showing the same faces, but with expressions of pure evil, their eyes following anyone who dared to look. Rebecca Rabbit tried to run to the bathroom, but the hallway stretched impossibly long before her. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like the inside of some massive beast. Door handles turned by themselves, revealing rooms that shouldn't exist. In the attic, something ancient stirred. It had been waiting for this moment, when the house would finally reveal its true nature. Chains rattled in the darkness above, and footsteps could be heard pacing back and forth, though no one was supposed to be up there. The living room television turned on by itself, but instead of cartoons, it showed only static, filled with fleeting images of terror. Occasionally, a face would appear in the snow, sometimes familiar, sometimes not, but always screaming silently. Mummy Pig descended the stairs, but her apron was stained with something dark and sticky. Her smile was too wide, stretching beyond what should be physically possible. "Dinner is ready," she announced, though no one had seen her cooking anything normal. The dining room table was set for a feast, but the plates contained things that defied description. The chairs pulled themselves out, inviting the terrified guests to sit for a meal they would never forget, assuming they survived to remember it. Pedro Pony appeared at the window, but he was outside looking in, his breath fogging the glass as he pressed his face against it. His eyes were completely white, and when he opened his mouth to speak, no sound came out, only darkness. The house itself began to shift and change. Rooms rearranged themselves when no one was looking. Doors led to different places than they had moments before. The very geometry of the building defied logic and reason. Candy Cat materialized in the corner, but her usual sweetness had been replaced by something predatory. Her claws, once hidden, now extended like razors. She purred, but the sound was more like the growl of a wild beast preparing to strike. The basement door, which had always been locked, slowly creaked open. A cold wind rushed up from below, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. Something was calling from the depths, speaking in voices that belonged to children who had visited this house long ago. As midnight approached, the house revealed its final secret. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Every brick, every board, every nail had been infused with a consciousness that fed on fear and innocence. The pig family weren't the owners of this house, they were its servants. The walls began to bleed a thick, dark substance that spelled out words in languages that predated human civilization. The message was clear to anyone who could read it. Welcome to your new home. You will never leave. You will become part of us. And in that moment, as the clock struck 12, Peppa's laughter filled every room of the house. But it wasn't the giggle of a happy little pig anymore. It was the sound of something that had been waiting centuries for new playmates to join its eternal game. The House of Horrors had claimed its newest residents, and somewhere in the darkness it was already preparing for the next visitors who would dare to knock on its door.
A scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a perfectly normal morning in Peppa's house, but something felt different. The walls seemed to whisper secrets that only children could hear. Peppa woke up to find her family sitting at the breakfast table, their smiles too wide, their eyes too bright. "Good morning, Peppa," said Mummy Pig, her voice echoing strangely in the yellow kitchen. Daddy Pig's glasses reflected nothing, just empty darkness. George sat perfectly still, his favorite dinosaur toy staring with painted eyes that seemed to follow Peppa's every move. At playgroup, all of Peppa's friends were already there, standing in a perfect circle. They turned to look at her in perfect synchronization, their heads moving like clockwork dolls. "We've been waiting for you, Peppa," they said in unison. The playground equipment cast long shadows even though the sun was directly overhead. The slides stretched impossibly high into the gray sky, and the swings moved by themselves, creaking a lullaby that made Peppa's skin crawl. When it was time to go home, Peppa realized she couldn't remember how she got to playgroup. The path home seemed different, longer, with trees that bent toward her like grasping fingers. Her house appeared at the end of the street, but all the windows were dark except for one. Inside, her family was waiting at the dinner table, the same two wide smiles on their faces. "Welcome home, Peppa," they said together. "We've prepared your favorite meal." But when Peppa looked at her plate, she saw her own reflection staring back, trapped behind the porcelain surface, silently screaming for help. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was bedtime at the pig house. Peppa climbed up the purple ladder to her top bunk, while George settled into the bottom bed below. Their favorite toys were scattered around: the teddy bear, toy train, colorful blocks, and Mr. Dinosaur sitting quietly on the shelf. Mummy Pig tucked them both in with gentle kisses goodnight. The room fell into peaceful darkness as she closed the door. Outside, the moon cast gentle shadows through the bedroom window, but as the clock struck midnight, something began to change. George was the first to notice it. His beloved Mr. Dinosaur slowly turned its plastic head toward the bunk bed. The toy's painted eyes gleamed in the moonlight, no longer friendly. Peppa stirred as she heard a soft, scraping sound. Looking down, she saw the toy train beginning to move along its tracks, even though no one had wound it up. The little engine chugged forward, its tiny headlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The teddy bear began to rock back and forth on its own. Its button eyes reflected the moonlight like tiny black mirrors, and its sewn-on smile seemed to have twisted into something sinister. George pulled his blanket up, watching in growing fear as more toys began to stir. The colorful blocks started stacking themselves into impossible towers. They moved with purpose, creating strange patterns that hurt to look at. The Jack-in-the-Box began to play its melody, but the tune was wrong. Slower, deeper, filled with discordant notes. Peppa tried to call out to George, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The toys seemed to sense their fear and began moving faster. The toy cars raced around the room in perfect circles, their wheels making no sound. George watched in horror as Mr. Dinosaur climbed down from the shelf, its plastic limbs moving with unnatural fluidity. The toy that had once brought him comfort now approached the bunk bed with predatory intent. Its painted smile had become a grimace. The room filled with the sound of toys coming to life. Gears turning, springs bouncing, plastic parts clicking together. The friendly nursery rhyme from the music box became a haunting dirge that echoed from the walls. Peppa looked down at George and saw that his eyes had become glassy and distant. He was no longer looking at her with recognition, but with the same blank stare as the toys. His movements became jerky and mechanical. The toys formed a circle around the bunk bed, all facing inward with their artificial eyes fixed on Peppa. She realized with growing dread that she was the only one left who hadn't been changed. The room had become a prison of animated nightmares. As dawn approached, the toys slowly returned to their positions. But George remained motionless in his bottom bunk, his eyes still holding that glassy, toy-like stare. When Mummy and Daddy Pig came to wake them, they found only Peppa talking to her new toy brother, who never blinked or spoke, but always smiled that perfect painted smile.